The first thing my mother said to me that night wasn't hello. It was, "You don't need to sit up front. Save those seats for people who matter." She said it quietly and with a smile, the way women do when they don't want witnesses but still want control. We were standing in the entryway of my parents' house, coats piled over one arm, the smell of rosemary chicken drifting from the kitchen. Thanksgiving Eve, 40 people inside, laughter everywhere. And yet somehow I had already been put back in my place before I even crossed the threshold. I was 31 years old. I paid my own rent. I had a job that kept the lights on. But in that house, I was still the afterthought. I didn't know yet that by the end of the year, every person who dismissed me that night would be sitting in a lawyer's office staring at a document they never expected to see. I didn't know that the inheritance they were already dividing in their heads was about to disappear from their hands. All I knew, standing there with my coat slipping off my arm, was that something in me finally snapped. And once it did, there was no putting it back together. My name is Laurel Hayes. I'm the middle child, the invisible one, the one who turned out fine, which in my family meant no one bothered to look closer. My older sister Veronica had always been the star. She married money. Young had the house with the double staircase, the Christmas cards with matching outfits, the kind of life my parents could show off at church. My younger brother Caleb was the baby, the fragile one, the excuse for every bad decision. I was the space between them, the one who learned early that silence was safer than asking for more. That night I followed my mother into the living room and took the seat she pointed at. The far end of the couch, no armrest. Half blocked by a side table stacked with photo albums. Veronica's wedding album sat on top. Of course it did. "You look tired," my father said as he passed by, already turning away before I could answer. "I worked late," I said. He nodded vaguely. "That happens when you don't plan ahead." Veronica laughed from across the room. She was holding a glass of wine, perfectly relaxed, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Some of us figured out stability early," she said, not looking at me directly. "Others prefer flexibility." There it was, the word they always used, flexible. As if my life were a temporary inconvenience they tolerated out of politeness. I smiled. I always smiled. That was my role. Dinner was worse. We gathered around the long dining table, the one my grandmother had paid for decades ago, though no one mentioned her much anymore. My father carved the turkey. My mother directed traffic. Veronica's husband, Mark, talked loudly about real estate investments. Caleb scrolled on his phone, excused as usual. "And Caleb's thinking of starting something new," my mother announced proudly. "Another business idea." My fork paused mid-air. "Didn't the last one close?" She waved a hand. "Entrepreneurship takes time." I swallowed. I thought that was only true when it applied to Laurel, my father cut in sharply. "Not tonight." The table went quiet for half a second, just long enough for the message to land. I wasn't allowed to question. Not him. Not them. "So Laurel," Mark said, leaning back in his chair. "Still at that consulting place?" "Yes," I said, "still there." "And is that long-term?" he pressed, smiling like he was being helpful. Veronica sipped her wine. She likes keeping her options open. I met my sister's eyes. She looked away first. That was when I noticed something strange. My grandmother's chair was empty. Not just empty, gone. The chair she always sat in, the one with the carved arms and faded cushion, wasn't at the table at all. In its place was an extra leaf squeezed in to make room for Caleb's girlfriend, who no one liked but tolerated, because Caleb insisted. "Where's Grandma's chair?" I asked. My mother stiffened. "We didn't need it. She always sat there," I said slowly. Veronica shrugged. "Things change." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. After dinner, while everyone drifted into their usual clusters, I wandered into the hallway that led to my parents' study. The door was half open. Inside, the desk lamp glowed. I hadn't been in that room in years. That's when I saw it. A manila envelope on the desk. Thick. Legal-looking. My grandmother's name typed neatly across the front. I shouldn't have touched it. I knew that. But curiosity has a way of sharpening when you've been ignored your whole life. Inside were copies of documents. A revised will, recently dated. My grandmother's signature shaky but clear. And right there in black and white was the sentence that changed everything. "I hereby revoke all previous distributions to my daughters and grandchildren, with the sole exception of Laurel Hayes." I read it 3 times before my knees went weak. The house buzzed with laughter behind me. my family celebrating a future they thought they owned. They had no idea they had already been cut out of it. Footsteps sounded behind me. I turned just as my mother appeared in the doorway. Her eyes went straight to the envelope in my hands. For the first time that night, she didn't smile. "What are you doing in here?" she asked. I held the papers tighter, my heart pounding, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "I think," I said slowly, "we need to talk about why Grandma changed her will." Her face drained of color. And in that moment, I understood something with terrifying clarity. They hadn't just overlooked me. They had been hiding something from me. And now that I knew, there was no going back. My mother didn't answer me right away. She stood there in the doorway of the study, one hand gripping the doorframe, as if the house itself might tip if she let go. Her mouth opened-closed, then settled into the thin line I recognized from childhood, the one she wore when she'd already decided the truth was too inconvenient to share. "You shouldn't be in here," she said finally. "Those are private papers." "They have my name on them," I replied. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Inside, something was cracking open, slow and deliberate. "And Grandma's." She stepped forward and gently, almost tenderly, took the envelope from my hands. That softness scared me more than anger would have. Softness was how my mother erased things. "Your grandmother has been confused lately," she said. "You know that." I shook my head. "No. I know you say that whenever she disagrees with you." Her eyes flashed. "That's not fair." "I'm not trying to be fair," I said. "I'm trying to understand why no one told me she changed her will." From the living room, laughter burst out loud and careless. Veronica's laugh sharp and bright. The sound traveled down the hallway like a reminder of who held court in this family. My mother lowered her voice. "This is not the time." "When would have been?" I asked. "Before Thanksgiving, after Christmas, or never." She exhaled sharply and closed the study door behind her, sealing us in. "Your grandmother was upset," she said. "She felt overlooked." I almost laughed. "By who?" Her silence answered me. "She thinks Veronica doesn't visit enough," my mother continued. "She thinks Caleb wastes money. She thinks your father and I don't listen." "And what does she think about me?" I asked. My mother looked away. "That was answer enough." "She thinks you're the only one who shows up," she said quietly. "The only one who calls without needing something." The words landed heavy but not surprising. I thought of the weekly grocery runs I'd done for Grandma, the doctor appointments, the afternoons spent listening to stories I'd already heard a dozen times because she needed someone to listen again. And instead of fixing that, I said, "You hid it." "We didn't hide it," she snapped. "We were handling it." I leaned against the desk, grounding myself. "Handling it how?" She hesitated. "Your father spoke to the lawyer. We thought it would blow over." "By ignoring it," I said. "That's not ignoring," she insisted. "That's managing." I met her eyes. "You manage things by pretending they don't exist. That's not the same." Her shoulders slumped slightly. "Laurel, you don't understand how complicated this is." "I understand perfectly," I said. "You didn't want Veronica hurt. You didn't want Caleb cut off. And you didn't think I mattered enough to include." "That's not true," she said quickly. I waited. She didn't continue. A knock came at the door. Mom Veronica's voice. Sweet, curious, dangerous. "What are you two doing in there?" My mother straightened. "Just a minute." She turned back to me, urgency sharpening her features. "We will talk about this later. Not tonight." "No," I said. "If we don't talk now, you'll pretend it never happened." Her jaw tightened. "Laurel, please." The word please again, used like a leash. I opened the study door before she could stop me. Veronica stood there, wine glass in hand, eyebrow raised. "What's going on?" "Ask Mom," I said evenly. My mother stepped between us. "It's nothing." "Nothing usually doesn't involve the study," Veronica said lightly. Her eyes flicked past us, scanning the desk. "Did something happen with Grandma?" My heart thudded. I watched my mother choose. "Your sister was just mistaken about some paperwork," she said. I turned to her. "Mistaken?" She didn't look at me. Veronica laughed. "Oh my God, is this about Grandma again?" She sighed dramatically. "She's been so emotional lately." "Careful," I said. "That's still your grandmother." Veronica shrugged. "I love her, but she's not thinking clearly." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Funny," I said. She was clear enough to rewrite her will. The silence that followed was thick and immediate. Veronica's smile froze. "What?" My mother spun toward me. "Laurel." "What?" I repeated. "She deserves to know." Veronica stared between us. "What are you talking about?" My mother closed her eyes. "This is not how I wanted you to find out." Veronica laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. Find out what? I looked directly at my sister. Grandma changed her will. She left everything to me. The words hung in the air like smoke. Veronica blinked, once, twice. Then she laughed again, louder this time. That's not funny. I'm not joking. She turned to my mother, Mom. My mother looked small suddenly. Older. Tired. We were going to tell you. When Veronica demanded, after she dies, I stepped aside as Veronica pushed into the study, scanning the desk opening drawers. She found the envelope and pulled out the papers with shaking hands. Her face changed as she read. First confusion, then disbelief, then something darker. This isn't real, she said. She wouldn't do this. She did, I said quietly. Veronica looked up at me, eyes blazing. You manipulated her. I didn't flinch, I showed up. That's the same thing, she snapped. No, I said, it's not. She turned on my mother. You let this happen. We thought it was temporary, my mother said weakly. Veronica laughed a brittle sound. Of course you did. She folded the papers carefully as if afraid they might burn her fingers. This isn't over. No, I agreed. It isn't. She pointed at me. You think you won? I met her gaze. I think you underestimated me. Her lips curled. You always were good at playing the victim. And you, I said, were always good at pretending you didn't notice. Her eyes narrowed. This won't stand. I believed her. But I also believed something else. For the first time in my life, the truth was on paper. Signed, witnessed, legal. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be a quiet erasure. It would be a fight. And I was done sitting at the far end of the table. The next morning, I woke up to silence that felt staged. No clatter of dishes. No morning news humming from the living room. No smell of coffee drifting down the hallway. It was the kind of quiet my parents' house only had when something bad had happened, and everyone was pretending not to touch it. I lay in the guest bed staring at the ceiling fan, counting the rotations like I used to as a kid when I needed to calm myself. Somewhere downstairs a floorboard creaked, then another. Someone was awake, watching. By the time I got dressed and walked into the kitchen, the entire family was already there, every chair filled, except one, Grandma's. My mother stood at the counter stirring oatmeal she hadn't eaten in years. My father sat at the head of the table, hands folded, posture rigid. Veronica sat to his right, already perfectly made-up, eyes sharp and sleepless. Caleb slouched in his chair, hoodie pulled low, pretending this had nothing to do with him. They all turned to look at me at once. No one said good morning. I poured myself coffee anyway, slowly, deliberately. If they were going to stage an ambush, I wasn't going to rush into it. We need to talk, my father said. I took a sip. About what? Veronica scoffed. Don't play dumb. I met her eyes. I'm not. My father cleared his throat. Your mother and I spoke with the family attorney this morning. Of course they had. And I asked. And he confirmed the document is valid, my father said. His voice was flat, controlled. The voice he used when he didn't like an answer but couldn't argue with it. My grip tightened slightly around the mug. Then what's the problem? The silence stretched. Veronica leaned forward. The problem, she said, is that this isn't what Grandma would have wanted. I raised an eyebrow. You mean it's not what you wanted? She ignored that. She's been influenced. By who, I asked. Her eyes locked on mine. You? My mother flinched. I set my mug down. Let's be clear, I said. I didn't ask her for anything. I didn't even know about the will until last night. That's convenient, Veronica said. It's true, I replied. Caleb finally looked up from his phone. So you're just okay with taking everything? Everything. The word tasted bitter. I didn't take anything I said, she gave it. That's the same thing, he muttered. No, I said, it's not. My father rubbed his temples. This family has always shared responsibility, shared resources. I laughed quietly, I couldn't help it. Shared, I repeated. When was the last time responsibility was shared, Dad? He stiffened. Watch your tone. When was the last time I pressed that Veronica paid for anything without being reimbursed, or Caleb faced consequences for burning through money? When was the last time I asked for help and didn't get told to handle it myself? No one answered. Veronica crossed her arms. You've always been bitter. I've always been observant, I said. My mother turned from the stove. Laurel, please understand. This puts us in an impossible position. I gestured around the table. You look very united for people in an impossible position. That was when I realized it. They had already decided. Not together, maybe. Not consciously. But instinctively, the way families like ours always did. They had closed ranks, drawn the circle, and once again I was standing outside it. My father straightened. We think the best course of action is to contest the will. There it was. The word hung in the air, heavy and ugly. You're going to sue me, I said slowly. It wouldn't be against you, my mother said quickly. It would be about protecting your grandmother. By taking away her decision, I replied. She's vulnerable, Veronica said. And you took advantage. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger, not shock, something colder, clearer. You're not protecting Grandma, I said. You're protecting yourselves. Caleb shrugged. Same thing. I stood there looking at them, really looking, and for the first time I saw the pattern with brutal clarity. They weren't upset because they loved her. They were upset because the rules had changed without their permission. My father spoke again. If we proceed, this could get messy. I nodded. Yes. And public, Veronica added pointedly. I smiled faintly. Is that a threat? She tilted her head. A warning. My mother stepped toward me. Laurel, sweetheart, this doesn't have to turn into a war. I met her gaze. It already has. I just didn't start it. Another silence. This one felt different, less confident, less certain. My father sighed. If you agree to split the inheritance evenly, we can avoid all of this. There it was, the real offer. Evenly, I asked. After years of uneven treatment, this isn't about the past, he snapped. It always is, I said. Veronica rolled her eyes. You're really going to blow up the family over money. I thought of Grandma's thin hands pressing mine as she'd thanked me for coming, for listening, for remembering. No, I said. You're blowing up the family because you can't stand that I was chosen. Caleb scoffed. You think you're special now. I looked at him. No, I think I was consistent. My father pushed back his chair. Then we're at an impasse. Yes, I agreed. He stood. Our lawyer will be in touch. I nodded. Mine too. That surprised them. Veronica's eyes narrowed. You already have a lawyer. I picked up my coffee again, hands steady. I make plans. Remember that thing you mocked me for? My mother looked stricken. You didn't tell us you were leaving. I didn't know I said. But I am now. I walked out of the kitchen without another word, went back to the guest room and packed my bag. Each folded shirt felt like a closing door, each zipped pocket like a boundary finally being drawn. As I carried my suitcase down the stairs, no one stopped me. No one followed. At the front door, I paused and looked back. This house had raised me, shaped me, taught me exactly how quiet injustice could be. And now it was teaching me something else. How quickly love turned conditional when money entered the room. I stepped outside into the cold morning air, my breath fogging, my phone already buzzing with a message from an unfamiliar number. Law Office of Daniel Mercer. I stared at the screen, then typed back. Yes, I'm ready. The war hadn't just been declared. It had been scheduled. Daniel Mercer's office sat above a dry cleaner and across from a bakery that smelled like sugar and burnt coffee. It wasn't impressive. No marble floors, no framed degrees screaming prestige. But the waiting room was quiet in a way that felt intentional, not empty. Like nothing happened here unless it mattered. That was the first thing I liked about him. He was in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, with silver hair he didn't bother to dye and eyes that didn't rush you. When he shook my hand, he didn't smile right away. He looked at me, really looked the way doctors do, before delivering news they know will change your life. You're Laurel Hayes, he said. Yes. And your grandmother is Eleanor Hayes. I nodded. She came to see me twice, he said, gesturing for me to sit. Once to ask questions, once to make decisions. My stomach tightened. She was clear. Daniel folded his hands, clearer than most people half her age. Relief washed through me, sharp enough to sting. She knew they'd fight it, I said. Yes, he replied calmly. She planned for that. That word, planned. He slid a file across the desk. Inside were copies of emails, handwritten notes, dated statements, documentation. Careful, meticulous. My grandmother had never done anything halfway when it mattered. She told me something, Daniel continued. She said, they'll say Laurel manipulated me. That's fine. I want the record to show who showed up before there was anything to gain. My throat tightened. She kept a log, he added. Visits, calls, who canceled, who didn't call back. I swallowed. Of course she did. Daniel nodded. The court likes patterns. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. So, what happens now? What happens now, he said, is that your family tries to paint you as opportunistic. I didn't argue. They'll say you were struggling, he went on, that you leaned on her emotionally, that she felt guilty. And you, I asked. I'll say, he replied evenly, that guilt doesn't usually result in notarized documents drafted over several months. I smiled despite myself. Then his expression shifted, growing more serious. There's something else, he said. I straightened. What? He opened another folder. Your grandmother didn't just change her will. My pulse jumped. What do you mean? She amended the trust attached to the house, he said. And the business. The business, I echoed. He looked up. You didn't know. I shook my head slowly. The Hayes Tool and Die Company, he said. Founded by your grandfather. Still operational. Still profitable. My mind reeled. That's been under Dad's control for years. Operational control, Daniel corrected, not ownership. The room felt suddenly smaller. She moved full ownership into the trust he continued with you as the sole trustee. I stared at him. That can't be right. It is, he said gently, and she added a condition. My heart pounded. What condition? He slid a single page toward me. Any family member contesting the will forfeits any claim to employment profit sharing or future distributions from the trust. I read it twice, then a third time. They weren't just fighting over money. They were fighting over control. Daniel watched my face carefully. This changes things. Yes, I said, it does. Outside the bakery, someone laughed. A car horn honked. Life went on. Inside, the balance of my family had just tilted. They'll go after you hard, Daniel said. Emotionally, publicly, possibly legally beyond the will. I know, I said. They may try to pressure you into settling, he added. Or isolating you. I thought of the silence that morning. The united front. The way they'd already rewritten the story in their heads. They already are, I said. Daniel leaned back. Then we proceed carefully. I nodded. I don't want revenge. He raised an eyebrow. Most people say that. I want fairness, I said, and I want the truth on record. He smiled then, not amused. Respectful. That's more dangerous to them than revenge. On my way out, my phone buzzed. Veronica. I let it ring. Then again. Then a text. We need to talk. This has gone too far. I stared at the screen, then typed back. You should talk to your lawyer. The reply came instantly. You don't get to do this. I slipped the phone into my bag. I already had. That afternoon, I drove to my grandmother's apartment. She lived in a quiet complex with wide hallways and potted plants no one watered properly. When she saw me, her face lit up in a way that made my chest ache. There you are, she said. I was wondering when you'd come. I kissed her cheek. You knew I would. She patted my hand. Sit. We sat by the window, the late afternoon light turning her silver hair almost white. They're angry, she said calmly. Yes. They always are when things don't go their way, she added. Did they tell you I was confused? I nodded. She smiled, sad but unsurprised. They said that when I told them no as children. I squeezed her hand. I don't want this to hurt you. She turned to me then, eyes sharp. It already hurt me, Laurel. For years. This just named it. I swallowed. I didn't do this for punishment, she said. I did it for balance. I nodded slowly. She leaned back. Whatever happens next, remember this. You didn't take anything that wasn't already being withheld from you. On the drive home, my phone buzzed again, this time from my mother. Please call me. I stared at the road ahead, long and straight and quiet. Then I turned the phone off. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to explain myself. They were about to learn what it felt like to be on the outside of a decision, and I had a feeling they weren't going to handle it well. The first letter arrived on a Monday. Cream-colored envelope. Thick paper. My name typed, not handwritten. The return address belonged to a law firm I didn't recognize, but I knew exactly who had hired them. Veronica didn't do subtle for long. I didn't open it right away. I left it on the kitchen counter while I made coffee, letting it sit there like a test. The kettle screamed, the clock ticked. My phone stayed silent. They were waiting to see if I'd flinch. I didn't. When I finally slit the envelope open, the words were predictable. Allegations, concerns, suggestions that my grandmother's emotional dependence on me had compromised her judgment. A polite threat wrapped in professional language. Daniel called an hour later. I assume you received the letter. Yes. Good, don't respond. I smiled faintly. I wasn't planning to. They're trying to rattle you, he said. They want you emotional, defensive, talking. I've done enough talking for one lifetime, I replied. He chuckled softly. That's exactly the right instinct. By Wednesday, the calls started. Not from Veronica, not from my father. From people who had never called me before. My Aunt Susan left a voicemail full of breathless concern. Your mother is beside herself, she said. This isn't like you, Laurel. We're worried about you. A cousin I barely knew sent a message asking if I was okay financially. Then came the email from Caleb. I didn't think you'd go this far. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Neither did I. That was the truth. Not the one they expected, but the only one that mattered. On Thursday night, my mother showed up at my apartment. No warning, no call, just a knock sharp and insistent like she was still allowed to demand entry into my life. When I opened the door, she looked smaller than I remembered. Not frail, just diminished. Her coat hung loosely on her shoulders. Her hair wasn't done. "Can I come in?" she asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked in slowly, taking in the space. My space. The modest couch. The framed photo of my grandmother and me at a farmer's market. She paused there. "You never told us you framed that," she said. "You never asked," I replied. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she sighed. "Your father is furious." I nodded. "I know. He feels betrayed." I leaned against the counter. "So do I." Her lips pressed together. "This is tearing the family apart." "No," I said gently. "It's showing where the cracks already were." She looked up at me, then eyes glassy. "Why didn't you tell us what you were doing with your grandmother?" I tilted my head. What would that have changed? She opened her mouth, then closed it. "You would have stopped me," I continued. "Or you would have reframed it as something suspicious. I chose not to give you that power." She flinched. "That's not fair." I shrugged. Neither was being invisible. Her shoulders sagged. "Veronica says you planned this." I laughed softly. "Veronica plans things, I respond to them. She thinks you're punishing her." "I'm not," I said. "I'm just not protecting her anymore." My mother looked down at her hands. She's scared. I felt something twist in my chest. Not pity, recognition. "She should be," I said quietly. "She's built her life on the assumption that someone else would always clean up after her." My mother stood abruptly. "So that's it? You're just going to watch us fall?" I met her gaze. "I watched myself fall for years. You didn't notice." Tears spilled over, then silent and uncontained. She turned away, embarrassed by them. "I don't recognize you," she whispered. I stepped closer. "You never did." She left without another word. By Friday, the story had shifted. I started hearing about myself from other people. How I was greedy. How I was unstable. How I'd always been jealous of Veronica. How I'd finally snapped. It was almost impressive how quickly they rewrote me. Daniel forwarded me a copy of a motion Veronica's lawyer had filed. Petition to declare Eleanor Hayes incompetent at the time of signing. I stared at the words until my vision blurred. "They're going after her," I said when I called him. "Yes," he replied. "That's usually the last move." My hands trembled. "That's unforgivable." "Which is why it won't play well," he said calmly. "We have her medical records, independent evaluations, statements from witnesses, and the logs," I added. "And the logs," he confirmed. That night I went to see my grandmother again. She was sitting in her chair, knitting something she'd never finish. When I told her what they'd done, she didn't look surprised. "They always did hate being told no," she said. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I never wanted this to hurt you." She reached for my hand. "It doesn't hurt the way you think. What hurts is realizing how little they listened." She squeezed my fingers. "Promise me something." "What?" "Don't back down because they cry louder," she said. "That's how they've always won." I nodded. "I promise." Outside, the sun was setting. The sky streaked orange and red. I stood in the parking lot for a long time before getting into my car, breathing through the weight of it all. They weren't just fighting for money anymore. They were fighting to protect the story they'd told themselves for decades. And stories like that didn't go quietly, but neither did I. Because once the mask started slipping, there was no pretending this was about love. It was about power. And for the first time in my life, they didn't have it. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, 9:30 sharp, in a courthouse that smelled like old paper and disinfectant. I arrived early not because I was nervous, but because I needed the quiet. There's a certain calm that settles in just before something irreversible happens. I wanted to feel it fully. Daniel met me in the hallway outside the courtroom, gray suit, same measured expression. "They're inside already," he said. "Of course they are." Veronica liked to arrive early to establish presence, to remind everyone in the room who she thought she was. When we walked in, I saw them immediately. My parents sat in the front row, shoulders stiff, hands folded too tightly. My mother looked pale, exhausted. My father stared straight ahead, like if he didn't turn his head, reality might blur around the edges. Caleb sat beside them, jaw clenched, phone finally out of sight. Veronica sat one row ahead, perfectly composed hair, immaculate eyes scanning the room like she owned it. She didn't look at me. That was how I knew she was afraid. The judge entered, an older woman with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. The kind of judge who'd seen every version of family betrayal and didn't care for dramatics. Daniel leaned close. "Remember," he said quietly, "you don't need to perform. The facts will do the work." I nodded. Veronica's attorney stood first. Tall, confident, smooth. He spoke about concern, about family, about vulnerability, about a grandmother allegedly isolated from her loved ones and influenced by one child at a time of declining health. I watched my sister as he spoke. She nodded at the right moments, pressed her lips together when he mentioned manipulation, played the part perfectly. Then Daniel stood. He didn't rush, he didn't raise his voice. He started with dates. He laid out a timeline. Medical evaluations showing my grandmother was mentally competent, independent assessments, bank records proving she managed her own finances, emails she'd written herself, notes in her handwriting. Then came the log, a printed record of visits and calls organized, dated, undeniable. He read names aloud. Veronica, 3 visits in 2 years, 6 canceled calls. Caleb, 1 visit, no follow-ups. My parents, sporadic contact, holidays only. Then my name, weekly visits, medical appointments, groceries, repairs, calls, long gaps filled by my presence. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. The room felt heavier with every word. Daniel finished by presenting a statement my grandmother had signed months before the will was finalized. A statement anticipating exactly what was happening now. She wrote, Daniel said, "If my family challenges this decision, let the record show that my mind was clear. My intent was firm and my reasons were earned." The judge leaned back slightly, reading silently. When she looked up, her gaze went straight to Veronica. "This petition alleges undue influence," the judge said evenly. "I see no evidence of that here." Veronica's attorney opened his mouth. The judge raised a hand. "What I do see," she continued, "is a pattern of entitlement." The word landed like a dropped plate. Veronica's composure cracked just slightly, enough that I noticed. The judge dismissed the petition. Just like that. No theatrics, no speeches, one gavel strike. Outside the courtroom, everything unraveled. My mother burst into tears the moment the doors closed. My father argued quietly with Veronica, his voice sharp with frustration. Caleb stormed off down the hall without a word. Veronica turned to me then. For the first time in weeks, she really looked at me. "This isn't over," she said. Her voice was low-controlled, but the desperation leaked through. I met her gaze. "You said that before." She laughed once, bitter. "You think you've won?" I thought of my grandmother's apartment, her quiet pride, the clarity in her eyes. "No," I said, "I think you lost." Her face hardened. "You always had to make things difficult." I smiled faintly. "You always made them unfair." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You don't belong where you are now. You never did." That was when I realized something important. She wasn't angry about the money. She was angry because the hierarchy had collapsed. "I belong exactly where I am," I said calmly. "You just don't like that it's not beneath you." My father interrupted, then his voice rough. "That's enough." Veronica spun on him. "Don't defend her." He didn't respond. For the first time in my life, he didn't rush to protect her. That silence said more than any argument ever had. I walked away without another word. That afternoon, Daniel called again. "They're still employed at the company," he said. "For now." "For now," I echoed. "The trust provisions give you authority," he continued. "If they continue hostile actions, you can exercise it." I closed my eyes briefly. "I don't want to hurt anyone." "You're not," he said. "You're enforcing boundaries." That night, I sat alone in my apartment, lights low, a glass of water untouched on the table. My phone buzzed once. A message from Veronica. "You took everything from me." I stared at the screen, then typed slowly. "No, you just lost what was never guaranteed." I set the phone down and didn't wait for a reply. Outside, the city hummed, indifferent and alive. Somewhere across town, my family was recalibrating, realizing that the rules they'd lived by no longer applied. The hearing had ended, but the consequences were just beginning. They had tried to erase me quietly. Now they were about to learn what it meant when the quiet ones stopped disappearing. The first call came from the accountant. He sounded nervous, like someone standing on a bridge that had just started to sway beneath his feet. "Laurel," he said, clearing his throat. "We need to discuss several irregular requests that came in this morning." I was at my kitchen table, laptop open, sunlight cutting across the floor in clean lines. I'd been waiting for this call longer than I wanted to admit. From whom I asked, though, I already knew. "Your sister," he said, "and your father." Of course. They both requested early disbursements from the company's operating account, substantial ones. "How substantial?" I asked. He hesitated, enough to raise concerns. I closed my eyes for a moment. This was the part Daniel had warned me about. When entitlement panicked, it reached for whatever was still within arm's length. "Did you approve them?" I asked. "No," he said quickly. "I froze the requests pending your authorization. As trustee, the final decision rests with you." There it was, the line that separated who I had been from who I was now. "Thank you," I said. "You did the right thing." When I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. Like a door clicking shut, not slammed, just firmly closed. 2 hours later, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. Then my mother. Then Veronica. I didn't answer any of them. By mid-afternoon, Daniel called again. They're escalating. How I asked. They're claiming the company will collapse without immediate liquidity, he said. They're trying to frame it as an emergency. Is it, I asked. No, he replied. Not even close. I leaned back in my chair. Then we wait. That night, Veronica showed up. She didn't knock. She pounded. I stood on the other side of the door for a long moment, listening to her breath sharp and impatient before I opened it. She looked unhinged. Not wild, not hysterical. Worse. Controlled rage, the kind that had been rehearsing speeches all day and found none of them landing. You can't do this, she said the second she saw me. I didn't step aside. I already did. She pushed past me anyway, heels clicking against my floor like she still owned the room. You froze the accounts, she said, spinning toward me. I paused. Unauthorized withdrawals, I corrected. Her laugh was brittle. You know exactly what you're doing. Yes, I said calmly. So do you. She turned, eyes blazing. You're trying to punish us. I folded my arms. No. I'm enforcing the trust, she scoffed. You don't understand how the company works. I met her gaze. I understand it doesn't exist to fund your lifestyle. Her face flushed. That company paid for everything we have. That company was built by Grandma and Grandpa, I said, not by you. Her mouth opened, then closed. She tried again. Dad needs access. He's running operations. Operational control doesn't include personal withdrawals, I replied. Especially during litigation. She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. You think you're better than us now, she said quietly. I shook my head. No, I think the rules finally apply to you. That was when she broke. Not screaming, not crying. She laughed. A sharp, humorless sound. You always were like this, she said. Quiet, watching, judging. I took a step closer. I wasn't judging, I was learning. Her voice dropped. You think this ends well for you? I thought of my grandmother's hands, of the courtroom, of the judge's eyes when she said entitlement. It already has, I said. She stared at me for a long moment, chest rising and falling. Then she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. You're alone in this, she said without turning back. Don't forget that. I closed the door behind her. The silence afterward felt clean. The next morning the calls stopped. Instead I got emails. From vendors. From longtime employees. From people who had never contacted me directly before. Your father said payroll might be delayed. Veronica told us to expect changes. Is the company stable? I forwarded them all to Daniel. He called me back within the hour. They're trying to sow panic. Will it work? I asked. No, he said. Because you're doing something they never did. What's that? Communicating. At his suggestion, I drafted a single clear message to all senior staff. Operations continue as normal. No layoffs planned. No delayed payroll. All financial decisions will be reviewed through proper channels during the legal process. I signed it with my name. Not as daughter. Not as sister. As trustee. The response was immediate. Thank you for the clarity. We appreciate the transparency. Good to know someone's paying attention. I sat there reading those messages, something unfamiliar tightening in my chest. Respect. Not forced, not inherited, earned. That evening my mother called again. This time I answered. Her voice was small. Your father is humiliated. I closed my eyes. He humiliated himself. She inhaled sharply. He's never been told no. Neither have you, I said softly. She didn't argue. Veronica says you're trying to destroy the family, she continued. I leaned against the counter. Veronica says a lot of things. She's scared, my mother whispered. So was Grandma, I replied. No one listened. Silence stretched between us. Then my mother said something I never expected. I didn't know, she said, how bad it was, how long. I believed her. And that scared me more than if she'd been lying. You knew enough, I said. You just didn't want to see it. Her breath hitched. What do you want from us? I thought about that for a long time. I want you to stop pretending this is about money, I said finally. And start asking why you were so comfortable letting me be the smallest one in the room. She didn't answer. When the call ended, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. But it was a good kind of tired. The kind that comes after you stop carrying weight that was never yours to begin with. Later that night, a message from Daniel came through. They're withdrawing the appeal, focusing on damage control. I stared at the screen. Then another message. You're holding steady. That's why this is working. I set the phone down and walked to the window. The city lights blinked back at me, steady and indifferent. For years, my family had treated money like proof of love and obedience like loyalty. Now the money had stopped answering. And without it, they were finally being forced to face what they'd built. And what they hadn't. The quiet one wasn't disappearing anymore. She was standing exactly where the system had never expected her to stand. And the table had turned. The first time someone inside the company called me by my title, I didn't recognize it as mine. "Good morning, Ms. Hayes," the receptionist said. "They're waiting for you in conference room B." I paused just long enough to steady myself. Ms. Hayes, not Laurel the Spare, not Veronica's sister, not the one who kept things calm and didn't ask for much. I walked down the hallway slowly, heels clicking against the polished floor, aware of every framed photograph on the walls. My grandfather shaking hands with employees, my grandmother cutting a ribbon with oversized scissors, group shots from company picnics back when families still came and stayed. There was no photo of my father. That should have told me something years ago. Inside the conference room sat three people I didn't expect to see together: the head of operations, the longtime human resources director, and a man in his late 60s with tired eyes and a legal pad already filled with notes. "Thank you for coming," the operations head said. "We thought you should hear this directly." I took a seat. "Hear what?" The man with the legal pad cleared his throat. "My name is Arthur Klein. I've been external counsel to this company on and off for more than 20 years. I nodded. "Then you know the history." "I know parts of it," he said carefully. "And I suspect you don't know all of it yet." My stomach tightened. "Go on." He exchanged a look with the others. Then he slid the legal pad toward me. Written across the top was a date, almost 15 years ago. That, he said, was the year your father assumed operational control. I swallowed. Yes. And that, he continued, was also the year the company quietly settled 3 internal complaints. My pulse thudded. Complaints about what? He didn't hesitate. Financial mismanagement. The room felt suddenly airless. "Your father authorized reimbursements that were not business-related," Arthur said. "Luxury travel, personal expenses, payments routed through shell vendors." I stared at him. Why wasn't this escalated? "It was the HR director," said softly. "To your grandparents." My chest tightened, and they confronted him, she said. He promised to correct course. He framed it as temporary, a misunderstanding. Arthur nodded. They believed him, but they never gave him ownership, only oversight. I thought of the trust, the careful language, the condition about forfeiture. "She knew," I whispered. Arthur inclined his head. "Your grandmother suspected the behavior resumed in recent years." The operations head leaned forward. "We've seen patterns again. Attempts to divert funds, pressure on staff to approve questionable expenses." My hands curled into fists under the table. "Why tell me now?" "Because now," Arthur said, "you're the only one with authority to stop it." The truth settled heavy and sharp. This wasn't just about favoritism. It never had been. It was about protection. My grandmother hadn't just chosen me because I showed up. She chose me because I wouldn't look away. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Arthur met my gaze. "Permission to audit." I didn't hesitate. "You have it." The audit moved fast. Faster than I expected. Faster than my family could spin. Within days, irregularities surfaced. Expense accounts tied to Veronica. Payments disguised as consulting fees. Cash advances with no documentation. Daniel called me the night the preliminary report came in. "They're in serious trouble," he said. "With the court?" I asked. "With the company," he replied. "And possibly the state." I closed my eyes. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt sick. Because beneath the numbers and documents was something uglier. They hadn't just ignored me. They'd used the company my grandparents built as a private safety net, assuming no one would ever question them. Assuming I never would. The call I dreaded came the next afternoon. From my father. His voice sounded different, not angry, not commanding. Cornered. "They're saying you authorized an audit," he said. "Yes," I replied. "You had no right," he snapped weakly. I inhaled slowly. "I had every right." He scoffed. "This is about revenge." "No," I said, "this is about accountability." Silence. Then his voice dropped. "You're going to ruin us." I thought of the conference room, the photos, the company that had fed families for generations. "No," I said quietly. "I'm going to save what you've been bleeding dry." "You think you're some kind of hero," he sneered. I felt something settle inside me, solid, unmovable. I think I said that Grandma knew exactly what she was doing. He hung up on me. That evening, Veronica sent a message. "This is unforgivable." I stared at the screen, then typed back. "So was lying for years." The next morning, news broke internally. My father was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Veronica's access to company accounts was suspended. Caleb quietly resigned. The staff didn't cheer. They exhaled. I saw it in their faces when I walked through the building that afternoon. Relief, caution, hope. One woman stopped me near the break room. She'd been there longer than I'd been alive. Your grandmother would be proud, she said softly. I nodded, throat tight. That night I visited Grandma again. I didn't tell her everything. I didn't need to. She looked at me from her chair, eyes sharp as ever. They showed you, didn't they? She asked. Yes. She nodded once. Good. I sat beside her. Why didn't you say anything sooner? She smiled sadly. Because sometimes people have to see the rot themselves before they'll cut it out. I squeezed her hand. They'll say you destroyed the family, she continued. I know. She patted my fingers. Let them. Families that survive only on silence deserve to be uncomfortable. As I left that night, the sky was heavy with clouds, the air thick with the promise of rain. They had tried to bury the truth. They had nearly succeeded. But the thing about burying the truth is this. If you don't finish the job, it comes back. And it doesn't come back quietly. It comes back with receipts. The leak didn't come from me. That part mattered. If I'd gone to the press myself, it would have fed every ugly narrative Veronica had been whispering for weeks. Greedy sister, power-hungry nobody, a woman who waited patiently until she could strike. That story was already written in their heads. What they didn't plan for was the truth walking out the door on its own. It started with a reporter calling Daniel. Not a gossip columnist, not a tabloid. A business reporter. Local, reputable. The kind who asked for documents, not quotes. Daniel called me immediately. We have a situation. I figured, I said. I'd felt it in my bones all morning. The strange quiet. The way the phones at the office had gone from ringing nonstop to not ringing at all. They've been tipped off about the audit, he continued. And the administrative leave. I closed my eyes. By who? Not you, not me. Someone internal. I thought of the break room woman. The relieved faces. The people who had been covering for my father's mess for years because they didn't know how else to survive. Will they print it? I asked. Yes, Daniel said, but not the way your family expects. The article went live the next morning. I was making coffee when my phone started vibrating across the counter like it was trying to escape. Headline first, clean, unemotional. Family-owned manufacturer. Faces internal investigation. Following trust dispute. No names in the headline, no drama words, just facts. But inside the article, the facts cut deep. A long-running family business. Allegations of financial impropriety. A recent change in trust leadership. An internal audit triggered by new oversight. Administrative leave for senior leadership pending review. They didn't call me greedy. They called me cautious. They didn't call my grandmother confused. They called her deliberate. They didn't frame it as a family feud. They framed it as a long-delayed correction. By noon, everyone knew. By 1, my mother called. Her voice was shaking. People are calling the house. I said nothing. Church friends, neighbors, your aunt's furious. I leaned against the counter, grounding myself. They'll move on. You humiliated your father, she said. I closed my eyes. He did that himself. Her breath hitched. Veronica hasn't left her house. I pictured my sister pacing phone in hand, refreshing feeds she couldn't control anymore. For the first time, the narrative wasn't bending to her voice. I didn't ask for this, I said quietly. But you didn't stop it, my mother replied. No, I said I didn't. She was silent for a long time. Then she asked, do you hate us? The question landed heavier than anything else that day. No, I said slowly. I hate what pretending did to us. She started crying then. Not performative, not strategic, just tired. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. I stared out the window at the street below, people walking dogs, carrying groceries, living lives, untouched by my family's collapse. You don't fix it, I said. You sit with it. That afternoon, Veronica finally called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. What have you done? She demanded. I held the phone away from my ear for a second, then brought it back. I didn't do anything. You let them destroy us, she snapped. They reported facts, I replied. That's not destruction. Her laugh was sharp and broken. You always had this smug way of pretending you were above it. I was never above it, I said. I was beneath it. You just didn't notice. She inhaled sharply. Dad might face charges. If he does, I said carefully, it won't be because of me. You wanted this, she accused. I thought of every Thanksgiving, every quiet dismissal, every moment I swallowed words to keep peace that only flowed one direction. No, I said. I wanted the truth. Her voice cracked. You've ruined my life. I almost laughed. Instead, I said, you built your life on something that wasn't yours. That's not my fault. She went quiet. Then softer, I don't know who I am without it. I believed her. That scared me more than her anger ever had. I don't either, I said. But that's not my problem to solve. She hung up without saying goodbye. The fallout spread fast. Vendors froze contracts until the audit concluded. Longtime partners asked for reassurance. Employees whispered, then stopped whispering, then started asking questions out loud. I answered everyone. Not defensively, not emotionally. With facts, with timelines, with transparency. By the end of the week, something strange happened. The fear in the building shifted. People stopped bracing. They started breathing. One manager pulled me aside. "We've been waiting for this," he said quietly. "Not the mess, the honesty." Another employee sent an email thanking me for not pretending nothing was wrong. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the city quiet beneath my windows, the article still open on my laptop. I reread one line over and over. The new trustee declined to comment publicly, but emphasized internal accountability and long-term stability. That was it. No quotes, no sound bites, just restraint. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from my grandmother. "Proud of you. Storms clear the air." I smiled, something warm and steady filling my chest. They thought revenge would be loud. They thought justice would scream. But the most devastating thing that had happened to them wasn't the audit or the article or the frozen accounts. It was this. The world finally saw them without their mask. And it didn't look the way they'd always told themselves it did. The story had turned, and this time they weren't holding the pen. The call came on a Sunday morning. Not from my family, not from Daniel. From a number I didn't recognize with an area code I hadn't seen in years. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. "This is Laurel Hayes," I said. "Ms. Hayes," a man replied, voice calm, measured. "My name is Richard Mallory. I represent Hawthorne Industrial Group." I sat up straighter. Hawthorne wasn't small. They weren't flashy either. Old money manufacturing. The kind that survived recessions by staying quiet and buying smart. "I'm listening," I said. "We've been following the situation at Hayes Tool and Die," he continued. "Your grandmother's company." My jaw tightened. "I'm aware." He paused as if choosing his words carefully. "We believe there may be an opportunity for mutual benefit." There it was, the phrase that usually preceded a takeover disguised as a favor. "I'm not interested in selling," I said immediately. "I didn't say selling," he replied. That made me stop. "We're interested in a strategic partnership," he said. "One that preserves your company's independence while stabilizing operations during this transitional period." I thought of my father on administrative leave, of Veronica locked out of accounts, of the staff watching me closely, waiting to see what kind of leader I would become. "And what do you get?" I asked. "A minority stake," he said, "non-controlling, plus a seat on the advisory board." "And what do I get?" I asked. "Capital," he said, "legal insulation, and credibility." I leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. "This feels fast," I said. He didn't deny it. Moments like this don't stay open long. After I hung up, I sat there in silence for a long time. This was the kind of opportunity my father would have jumped on without reading the fine print. The kind Veronica would have bragged about before it was finalized. The kind Caleb would have ignored until it benefited him personally. And here it was, sitting in my lap. I called Daniel. His reaction was immediate. "Be careful." "I am," I said, "but it's not a bad offer." "No," he agreed, "it's a powerful one." We met later that afternoon at his office. He reviewed the preliminary terms, scanning line by line, marking sections with his pen. "They're not trying to take control," he said finally. "They're trying to anchor you." "Why?" I asked. "Because companies in transition are vulnerable," he replied. "And because you represent stability right now." That word again. Stability. The thing my family claimed to value while quietly sabotaging it for years. "What would you do?" I asked him. Daniel leaned back. "I'd consider what kind of future you want. Not just for the company, for yourself." That night my mother called. I hesitated before answering. "Your father has retained counsel," she said without preamble. "Criminal defense." I closed my eyes. I expected that. "He's blaming you," she added softly. "I expected that too," she sighed. "Veronica is not well." I didn't respond. My mother hesitated. "She wants to talk to you." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. About what? She didn't say. I thought of the offer sitting on my desk, the power shifting quietly, permanently. "Not now," I said. My mother's voice wavered. "Laurel, this family is breaking." "It broke a long time ago," I replied gently. "We're just hearing it now." After we hung up, I walked through my apartment, touching familiar things. The chipped mug from my first job, the framed photo of my grandmother, the stack of documents on the table that had changed everything. I realized something then. For years, I had defined myself by what I endured. Now I had to define myself by what I chose. The next morning, I toured the factory alone. No entourage, no announcements. Just me and the hum of machines, the smell of oil and metal, the quiet rhythm of people doing work that mattered. One man looked up as I passed, older, calloused hands. He nodded once respectful. "Morning, Ms. Hayes." "Morning," I replied. I stopped near the back where my grandfather's old office still stood unused. Dusty, forgotten. I opened the door. Inside the desk sat exactly where it always had. A faded photo of my grandparents on the wall. A filing cabinet no one had touched in years. I ran my fingers over the desk, imagining my grandfather sitting here building something he hoped would last longer than he would. I understood then what my grandmother had done. She hadn't just left me assets. She'd left me a test. Would I preserve the thing they built, or would I let it be consumed by the same entitlement that had hollowed out our family? That afternoon, I called Richard Mallory back. "I'll consider your offer," I said, "but on my terms." He smiled through the phone. I could hear it. Of course. That evening, Veronica showed up again. This time, she didn't shout. She stood in my doorway, eyes red, shoulders slumped. "I need your help," she said. I looked at her for a long moment. Once those words would have undone me. Now they felt different. "What kind of help?" I asked. She swallowed. "I don't know who I am without the company, without Dad fixing things, without money smoothing it all over." I stepped aside and let her in, not because I owed her, but because I was finally strong enough to choose compassion without self-erasure. We sat across from each other in silence. "I'm not giving you control back," I said eventually. She nodded. "I know. I'm not protecting Dad from consequences," I continued. She nodded again, tears slipping free. "But I said if you want to rebuild something real, we can talk." She looked up at me, then really looked, and for the first time there was no competition in her eyes. Just exhaustion. "I don't know how," she whispered. I thought of the factory floor, the offer, the future waiting to be shaped. "You start," I said, "by telling the truth, even when it makes you smaller." She nodded slowly. That night after she left, I sat at my table and opened the partnership proposal again. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about legacy. And for the first time, the choice was mine. The quiet one wasn't just surviving now. She was deciding what came next. The meeting with Hawthorne Industrial Group was scheduled for the following Thursday, 10 in the morning. Conference room A. Coffee provided. That detail alone told me everything about how they did business. They didn't impress with excess, they impressed with preparation. Daniel sat beside me at the long table, legal pad, open glasses low on his nose. Across from us sat Richard Mallory and a woman I hadn't met yet, early 60s, sharp posture, sharper eyes. "This is Elaine Porter," Richard said. "Our chief financial officer." She nodded once. "Ms. Hayes." "Laurel," I said. "Please." She smiled faintly. "We'll see." We got straight to it. No flattery, no speeches about legacy or family values, just numbers, structure, safeguards. They weren't trying to save me. They were betting on me. That distinction mattered. "We're not here to replace leadership," Elaine said. "We're here to reinforce it." "And what happens when my family pushes back harder?" I asked. Richard didn't blink. "They already have. That's why we're interested." Daniel glanced at me, then back at them. "You're aware that criminal investigations may follow?" Elaine nodded. "We've read the filings." "And you're still willing to proceed?" I asked. She folded her hands. Companies survive when people finally stop lying to protect comfort. I felt something loosen in my chest. By the time the meeting ended, nothing was signed. But the framework was clear. They would invest. They would advise. They would not control. As they left, Richard paused. "One thing," he said. "You should expect resistance. Not from the market, from your family." I smiled thinly. "I already do." That afternoon, the resistance arrived right on schedule. My father's attorney requested a private meeting. Daniel read the email twice before looking up at me. "This isn't about negotiation." "What is it about?" I asked. "Containment," he replied. We met at a neutral office downtown. My father sat across from me, suit rumpled, jaw tight. His lawyer spoke first. "My client is prepared to accept responsibility for certain administrative oversights," he said carefully. "However, he believes continued public scrutiny will cause irreparable harm to the company." I leaned back. So the lawyer continued. "He proposes a resolution. You step down as trustee. He steps aside quietly. No charges, no further investigation." I laughed once. I couldn't help it. My father flinched. "That's not a resolution," I said. "That's a cover-up." "You're being emotional," the lawyer said. Daniel's pen tapped once on the table. "She's being precise." My father finally spoke. His voice was rough. "You think you're teaching me a lesson?" I met his eyes. "No, I think you taught me one." His face twisted. "After everything we gave you." There it was, the sentence that had haunted my childhood. I leaned forward. "You didn't give me anything you didn't also give with conditions." His jaw tightened. "You're ungrateful." "No," I said quietly. "I'm done pretending gratitude means silence." The lawyer cleared his throat. Ms. Hayes, if this proceeds, the consequences could be severe. I nodded. They already are for you. My father slammed his hand on the table. You always had to prove something. I didn't raise my voice. I proved it to myself. The meeting ended abruptly. That night, Veronica called again. I testified, she said. I closed my eyes. About what? About the expenses, she whispered. About Dad, about me. My chest tightened. Why? Because I was tired of lying, she said, and because I was afraid you'd never speak to me again if I didn't. I sat down slowly. This isn't about me. I know, she replied. That's the first time I've ever really known that. Silence stretched between us. They're charging him, she said softly. I know, I replied. I don't expect forgiveness, she added, but I wanted you to hear it from me. I thought of the years of competition, the sharp words, the quiet cruelty. I hear you, I said. That was all I could give. The charges were filed 2 days later. Financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty. The news cycle flared, then shifted as it always did. But inside the company, something settled. People stopped whispering. Processes stabilized. Trust, slow and cautious, began to rebuild. One afternoon, I received a handwritten note at my office. From my grandmother. You did what I couldn't. You didn't look away. I held the card for a long time. The partnership with Hawthorne moved forward. Carefully, transparently. I stood at the front of the room when it was announced, not as a savior, not as a martyr, but as a steward. This company isn't a prize, I said. It's a responsibility. People nodded. They understood. That night I sat alone again, the city quiet beneath me, the weight of it all finally settling. The truth hadn't negotiated. It hadn't softened. It had simply stood its ground. And because of that, everything else had to move around it. Tomorrow would bring consequences, but tonight I allowed myself something I'd never had before. Peace. Not because the storm was over, but because I was no longer afraid of it. The first time I walked into the factory after my father's sentencing, no one stopped working. That mattered more than applause ever could. Machines hummed. Forklifts rolled by. A radio played softly near the loading dock. Life steady and unremarkable went on. The kind of continuity my grandparents had built this place for in the first place. I paused near the entrance, letting the moment settle. For years, this building had felt like forbidden territory, something my family spoke about but never invited me into. Now it felt different, not triumphant, not vindictive, just honest. A man named Joe, who'd worked here longer than I'd been alive, caught my eye and nodded once. Respectful, simple. Morning, Ms. Hayes. Morning, I said. And for the first time, the words didn't feel borrowed. The company stabilized quickly after that. Not because I was brilliant, but because I refused to lie. I didn't promise miracles. I didn't hide mistakes. I didn't protect anyone who broke trust because they shared my last name. That alone changed everything. Hawthorne's involvement stayed quiet, exactly as they'd promised. Advisory meetings, capital buffers, no press releases, no speeches. The kind of partnership that worked best when no one needed to brag about it. At home, the silence took longer to settle. My mother stopped calling every day, then every week. Eventually, the calls that came weren't panicked or manipulative. They were small, ordinary. I found your grandmother's old recipe box, she said one evening. She wrote notes in the margins. Did you know that? Yes, I said. She told me. There was a pause. Then softly, I wish I'd listened more. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. Some realizations arrived too late to be fixed, but not too late to be named. Veronica moved into a small apartment across town. No housekeeper, no assistant. She found work at a nonprofit that helped people rebuild credit after financial collapse. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with status. She lasted. The first time she told me about a client who'd cried in her office because someone finally explained things without judgment, her voice shook. I think I understand now, she said, what you were doing all those years. I didn't say I told you so. I said I'm glad you stayed. Caleb disappeared for a while. Rehab, I heard. Then night classes. Then nothing. Some people need distance before they can grow. Some never come back. Come. I learned to accept that too. My grandmother passed quietly in her sleep one winter morning, a year after everything broke open. I was holding her hand when it happened. The room was still. The kind of stillness that doesn't feel empty. At the funeral, people came who hadn't spoken to my family in decades. Former employees, old neighbors, women who remembered her kindness more clearly than her title. No one asked about the money. They asked about her. That was her final gift. Afterward, I stood alone for a moment by her grave, the earth still fresh, the air cold and clean. "You knew," I whispered, "didn't you?" The wind stirred the leaves just slightly. I took that as yes. In the months that followed, I rebuilt my life in quieter ways. I moved into a smaller place closer to the factory. I stopped measuring my worth by proximity to approval. I learned how to rest without guilt. Sometimes late at night, I'd think about the girl I used to be. The one who sat at the far end of the table. The one who learned early that being easy made life easier for everyone else. I wished I could tell her this. You are not invisible. You were just standing in a room that didn't want to see you change. The revenge everyone expected never came. There were no speeches, no dramatic confrontations, no victory laps, just consequences. And healing. And the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when the system finally tested me, I didn't become what it tried to turn me into. I became myself. On the anniversary of the hearing, I found a note tucked into my desk drawer. My handwriting. Something I'd written in the chaos of that first month and forgotten. "Do not confuse peace with weakness," I smiled. Because peace, it turned out, was the strongest thing I'd ever claimed. If you're listening to this and you've ever been the quiet one, the overlooked one, the person everyone underestimated because you didn't make noise, remember this. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it documents. Sometimes it simply refuses to look away anymore. And when the tables finally turn, they don't do it with drama. They do it with truth. If this story resonated with you, if you've lived your own version of being dismissed, underestimated, or erased, share your story in the comments. I read them. I see you. And if you want more stories like this, stories about karma, family drama, betrayal, and what real revenge actually looks like, subscribe, and stay with me. Because the quiet ones always have the best timing, and their stories are far from over.